Are you showing everyone your Band-Aid?
Yes.
Yeah. What happened?
It.
It hurts. Why? What happened to it?
It.
Yeah, bites by a bug. Yeah, he had a little run-in with a mosquito earlier today, and he didn't like it, and he scratched it off really badly during his nap. So that's why he has a Band-Aid in his face. Hello internet, welcome back. This is Sierra and Little Man. You want to say hi?
Hi.
And on our channel today we are going to be doing another one of our many China adoption series videos. Since I've already said that, you guys can probably assume correctly that this is our son that we adopted from China this past fall. And he is the most perfect human in the entire world, aren't you?
Yes.
You are the most perfect person in the whole world. And he is the absolute highlight of our lives. And he just brings us so much joy because he's the best kid ever. Are you going to sit with me for the whole video?
Yes.
Okay, then you can sit up here if you want. That's fine. Okay, as you guys can tell by the title, today's topic of conversation is going to be how to choose the best China adoption agency. When Mr. and I started the adoption process, we didn't really put a lot of deep thought into choosing our agency, as in which agency we wanted to go with and thinking about what we really wanted out of an agency. So we talked about it last night and we decided to put together this video. Well, Mr. helped me put together this video. And he's not going to be in it, but we decided to put together this video to kind of share what we would recommend that people do in the event that they're going to adopt from China. But before we get started with that, if you guys are new around here, you guys should know that my name is Sierra and we are a family who lives in Japan. Every week we try to make a new video about our life in Japan and how we live a little bit more sustainably. So if any of those things are interesting to you, we make a lot of videos about that. Also, we make videos about adoption, Lush, and other stuff, and it's all kind of our life. So if either of those things are interesting to you, make sure that you subscribe, because not only do we have more of those videos coming out, we do have a couple of more China adoption videos coming out with different advice and thought topics. So as long as you're subscribed, you'll get all of those notifications. And as I already said, today we are talking about China adoption. And Mr. and I sat down, although he's not in this video, earlier today, and we talked about what we wish we would have known before we started searching for an adoption agency. So with that, let's get into it. We have, I think, 10 tips for choosing your adoption agency, and so let's get started. First thing that I would recommend doing when you are thinking about adopting from China and choosing your agency is to first just start by researching not just the China adoption program, but researching international adoption in general. And I know that that's kind of a strange thing to say, because if you're looking at an agency, you're probably already know kind of what you're getting into. Even though our agency did do a lot of training with us, they still wouldn't have given us a full picture of really what international adoption and China adoption specifically is like. However, I had some friends from college who adopted from China, and I basically asked them all about their experiences and what like the good experiences were, what their bad experiences were, and
Yellow.
I even... Yellow? Your shirt's yellow?
No.
No? What's yellow?
It's.
Oh, your toy's yellow. Mm-hmm.
It's yellow.
Yeah, your shirt's yellow. Yeah, I've already received a little bit of criticism about this on our channel, but on our channel I've chosen not to share the really hard, scary things that happened during our adoption process, and I don't think that I'm going to, because a lot of those things are very personal to our son, and I don't want to share those things because those things could be embarrassing for him, especially because I know a lot of people know there was a recent family who had to dissolve their adoption, and they shared a lot of things about their son that they'll never be able to unshare, and we don't want that to happen for little man. So those things are just not going to be shared. So in addition to that, seek out the horror stories. You want to cuddles? Okay. In addition to the good adoption stories, make sure that you seek out the adoption horror stories. I have some friends who had adopted from China who are very happy and they love their child, but within these families, the first few months for some of them were horrific. So when we went into our adoption, I already knew pretty much exactly what we were going into, and I mentally and emotionally prepared for the worst. I expected little man to scream and kick and bite and hate us and refuse to eat and hoard food and all of these really difficult things that I had heard a lot of families had experienced. And when some of those things didn't happen to us, I was a little bit relieved, if that makes sense. And when some of those things did happen, I kind of was already prepared for it, and we already had a mental plan of what we were going to do. And another good reason to do that is just because I feel like if you don't research those things, it's very easy to just not know what you're getting into, and then you end up in a situation that you don't want to be in.
2.
Very good. Tip number 2 is to Reach out to your family and friends and your church. Most of the time when we have friends and family who have adopted, we already know about that. However, there's always the chance that you have family members who have friends who have adopted from China or the region of the world that you're interested in adopting from. So you can ask them all of the questions that you have before you start the process in looking for an agency. And once again, going back to tip number 1, they can tell you all the things that they experience. And another thing to mention about churches, I know that some churches in the United States and in other countries have partnerships with various orphanages or organizations around the world. So it's possible that your church has a connection with a certain orphanage and they can connect you to a really good agency to adopt from that orphanage if that's something that you want. So definitely keep that in mind. Now moving on to tip number 3. Tip number 3 is really important, and that tip is to decide what you really want from your adoption agency. There are, I don't know about hundreds, but there's a ton of international adoption agencies that do adoptions through China. I don't actually have a number. I think that's something the internet would know. But when I say think about what you want from an adoption agency, understand that adoption agencies come in all shapes and sizes. They're all kinds of faith bases. They have all different kind of like systems and how they run. So think about what it is exactly that you want. Of course, everyone wants a successful adoption, so make sure that if you can find a way to check their track record, or you can even ask them about it. For example, when you look into an adoption agency, if you are a faith family, then it might be important to you that your agency is also based in your faith. The 2 agencies that we ended up using for our adoption were both Christian agencies, and as a Christian family, we found that really helpful because they were able to pray for us, and sometimes we were able to pray together. And when they came to do our home study, they were able to pray over our home with us. And it was just made it a little extra special to have that connection. And if that's something that's important to you and important to your family, it's definitely something to consider. Another thing that you might want with your agency to consider is the size of an agency. There are really small agencies and there are very big agencies. So if you want to be part of a bigger agency, for whatever reason, that's something to look into. And you can ask people who have adopted where they thought the bigger agency was better or the smaller agency was better. It just really depends on what kind of feel that you want. In my experience, because the 2 agencies that we used were a little bit smaller, having a smaller agency often makes it easier for the agency to kind of follow up with you and give you a little bit more of a personal experience. However, the smaller agencies tend to be in general a little bit newer, so it's also possible that they might make some mistakes. Not that they will make mistakes, but that's possible. And with larger agencies, you may not get such a personal experience, but your chances of having less mistakes might or may not be higher. Another thing you might want to consider is that some agencies may or may not have a full service travel agency in connection to their adoption agency. For example, I know of at least 2 or 3 adoption agencies that have not only adoption services, but also work with full service travel agencies. So they're able to not only facilitate your adoption, but they're also able to book all of your tours for you and all of your flights and deal with all of your hotels and all of that. And so if that's something that you'd be interested in, make sure that's something that you're looking into when you're looking into agencies. Next thing that you may want to consider is it varies by agency, but you may want to think about what you want to do with your money and how you want to handle your money while you are in China. Before we left the United States, we had to wire a lump sum of money to our adoption agency. That pretty much paid for all of our in-country costs, with the exception of some hotels and some meals. It overall just made the process a little bit easier. So some agencies will do that, some agencies will not, and you may or may not want someone else holding your money for you, if that makes sense. And then the last thing to think about and consider is what kind of travel group you want to travel with. For example, the main agency that we used for our adoption was pretty small, and so when it came to travel time, it was just our family and one other family, which I'm sure you guys saw in one of my vlogs. And what made that special for us is it gave us what felt like a little bit more of a personal experience and a little bit more of an intimate experience, because it was, as I already said, our guide and us and the other family, and that was it. However, on the flip side, you may feel more comfortable being part of a larger party, because then, you know, everyone is doing everything together, and it gives you the opportunity to meet more families so that you can figure out whose kids are the same ages who you can connect with. We personally really liked the other family that adopted at the same time as we did. However, our kids were at different ages, so I think it's maybe if we'd been part of a larger group, we would have been able to build relationships with families who had kids the same age. I don't know, just something to think about. Moving on to the next tip. Tip number 4 is to look online and use social media to search for information on adoption agencies. So what I mean by this is these days there are a lot of private groups on Facebook and various other websites that are specific to China adoption. So before you even start contacting these agencies, even though you've had all this input from family and friends, it never hurts to look at one more source, because the people in these forums may or may not have something really great or really terrible to say about the agency that you're considering using, and it might be nice to know about that. And if there's an agency that you really love, but you heard something horrible about them on the internet, you can always ask them about that when you call and talk to them. Moving on to tip number 5. This seems like kind of a no-brainer, but these mistakes do happen. And that tip is to make sure that the adoption agencies that you are looking for serve your area. When we were looking for our adoption agency, we did not put enough consideration in this, and we ended up having to use 2 different agencies, one for the actual adoption and one for the home study. And it worked out fine, but it was a little bit complicated getting them to work together. Moving on to tip number 6. That's 6 in sign language. For choosing your adoption agency is to make a long list of questions of things that you would like to know about each agency and write them all down on a piece of paper. It could even be an Excel sheet, anything like that, where you can record your questions and your responses. And the biggest reason that you'll want to do that is because you'll be able to see exactly what you asked and see exactly what their responses were. And then later, when you go to make your final decision, you can compare all of them together. Next tip for choosing your China adoption agency, I feel like this is kind of a given and no-brainer, but number 7 is to call them and actually talk to them. And when you call and talk to them, they're probably going to first put you through to their main director or like a mobilizer, or someone who just kind of like answers the phone. Ask to speak specifically or to schedule a time to specifically speak with the China program director. So in our experience, at the end of the phone call, he or she in the couple of places that we talked to eventually referred us to the China director anyway. And while you are speaking with them on the phone, make sure that you ask open-ended questions. So rather than saying, do you have this option, you could say, what options do you have for this? And something that they tell you might pop up that you never even thought to ask, just because it was an open-ended question. Also, while you're talking to the agency director, you can try to ask them, they may or may not be able to give you the information, but ask them how many adoption placements they've done from China, from the organization within the past year or a certain number of years, whatever. And in addition to that, if possible, and again, that might not be available because of family privacy, ask them what % of those adoptions were successful, meaning how many of them were disrupted or how many had to be dissolved. Yeah, and then again, when you're on the phone with them, the last thing you should ask them again is all the questions about things that I mentioned in number 4. So tip number 8 for choosing your adoption agency is to insist on a contract copy before paying an application fee. As I've said multiple times in this video, every agency is a little bit different, and I always feel like it's the best practices to look at and see exactly what it is that you're signing up for and exactly what is going to be covered and not covered within your contract, so that later down the road you don't have any surprises, because nobody likes surprises in this particular situation. Okay, moving on to tip number 9. Tip number 9 is to write down the impression of them as soon as you hang up. First impressions are a really big deal, so when that phone call is finally finished, just take a few minutes to jot down how you're feeling during the call, because that feeling that you had is real. And if you felt a little bit uneasy with them at the first initial contact and you didn't write that down, and then you signed up with them and ended up having big problems later, there's nobody to blame but you. Okay, moving on to the last and final tip. Tip number 10 for choosing your international China adoption agency is to not rush this process. Take time to consider and think about what you really want when you're choosing your agency. I know that it may be tempting to find an agency that you love and sign the papers right away, but the reality of this whole situation is that the China adoption process is long. The China adoption process is really hard. And at the end of the day, especially if you're having problems in country or throughout the process, having the right agency or the wrong agency can either make or it can break your experience. And I've heard stories from both ends of the spectrum, and to all the people that I've spoken to, they all agree with me that it is far better to take a little bit more time choosing your agency or making a decision on whatever it is you're trying to make a decision about throughout this process than to just make an impromptu decision that you may regret later. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to say. So if you guys watched up to this point, thank you guys so much for supporting our channel. And if you liked it and if you are interested in international adoption, we have a couple more videos coming up, and we also have our entire adoption story on our channel, so I'll link that playlist below and up in the cards for you guys to check out. And I hope that you guys will subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.